Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 5. Chirani kim patina shanti dushanti bhiksham. Naivang gripaha parabrita shritopi asusyan. Rudha guhake majitavati nopasanan. Kasmad bhajanti kavayodhana dharma dandhan. Chirani kim patina shanti dushanti bhiksham. Naivangi paha parabrita sritopi asusyan. Rudha guhake majitavati nopasanan. Kasmad bhajanti kavayodhana dharma dandhan. Chirani kim pathina shanti deshanti bhiksham. Naivangri paha parabhrita sarito pi asusyan. Rudha guha kim majito vati nopasanan. Kasmad bhajanti kavayodhana dharma dandhan. So Shukadeva Goswami is continuing to emphasize the importance of simple living for a transcendentalist. People are endeavoring very hard to buy clothes. People have to spend so much money to buy food and buy other necessities of life, and they have to endeavor so hard to pay for the extra amenities that they need to maintain a high standard of living. So Shukadeva Goswami is pointing out that by the laws of nature, most needs of mankind can be supplied, and there's no need to artificially endeavor so hard. All we need is being provided by the agency of the Lord. Still, the scientists and the politicians will take credit for providing them. For example, the trees give us all the fruits that we need. The earth gives us all the grains that we need. And the rivers and the oceans give us the water that we need for our survival. And the mountains and the earth also give us all the other minerals, diamond, gold, everything else that we use. Even the oil that you use is provided by the Lord underneath the earth. So everything is being provided by the agency of the Lord. All that the modern day scientists are doing is manipulating the resources being provided by God. Therefore, in the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Annat bhavanti bhutani prajanan anna sambhava. He says that food grains come from rainfall. Rainfall comes by sacrifice. Sacrifice means performing religious duties. Just like in your country presently, there's a big shortage of producti. And the government is busy inviting consultants from America and other parts of the world to get some suggestions how to solve these problems. But the solution is there in the Bhagavad Gita. If you perform religious duties, then material nature will cooperate. But if you don't perform, then material nature will go on strike. Maya dakshina prakriti suyate sa characharam. This material energy of mine is working under my direction. So Prakriti is not independent of Krishna, but Prakriti is subordinate to Krishna. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, we read the stories of King Vena and King Prithu. King Vena was godless, and as a result of his godless tendencies, material nature started withholding the supplies that was needed by his population, and in the end King Vena was cursed to die. When his son King Prithu became the king, the citizens came to the king and said, King, it is your duty to provide us with the basic necessities of life. You must give us food to eat, place to stay, and clothing to wear. The king said, I am totally incapable of providing anything. But if you glorify the Supreme Lord, then all necessities will be provided. And the citizens glorify the Lord, and all the necessities are provided. So all necessities of life can be provided once we glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if simple living is our guiding principle, then one will always have time to glorify the Supreme Lord. Many times when we are preaching to people, even in countries like India, many people, they say, yes, what you're saying, Swamiji, is true, but we are so busy that there's no time for chanting or doing any religious duties. So, A simple living leaves one with enough time to concentrate on spiritual activities. Now there are two other important points that Shukadeva Goswami is making in this verse. One is that the Lord always protects his surrendered souls. And the second point which Shukadeva Goswami makes, that it is not the business of the spiritualist to flatter the materialist. Unfortunately, we see that even the so-called spiritualists, when they are in front of the gross materialists, they flatter them. Why? So that they can get some money out of them. Even in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we read that Shukracharya's sons were the teachers of Prahlad Maharaj. And Hiranyakashipu was telling Prahlad's teachers, make sure my son doesn't remember Krishna. And they said, no problem, we'll try our best. Because Shukracharya was just interested in money, in his comfortable living. So therefore, when he was given the assignment of brainwashing Prahlad to forget God, he gladly agreed. The word Shukra means semen. So basically, there are two classes or two categories of spiritual masters. One is by birth, the other is by qualification. So we in the Krishna conscious movement, in the Vaishnava Sampradaya, reject spiritual authority just on the basis of birth. Qualification has to be there, just like in the material situation. Just because the father is a doctor does not mean that the son will automatically become a doctor. So the business of the spiritualist is to always speak the truth, but in a palatable manner. Just like the Bhagavatam says, the materialists are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. Saved varahastra kare samsuta purusha pashu. So that is, and the Bhagavatam says, those who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses, they are busy glorifying others who are also like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. So obviously when you go to preach, you don't tell the audience, dear Mr. Dogs and Hogs, please listen to my message. You can tell them in a nice way that the activities are similar to the animals. So the point is that the genuine spiritualist presents the truth, but in a palatable manner. And just for the sake of money, one doesn't go to a so-called rich man and flatter him to make him feel that what he's doing is right. You devotees may not have exposure to this, and you may be wondering, why should the Bhagavatam mention things like a saintly person flattering a rich man? The Bhagavatam is mentioning this point because there are many so-called saintly people who are doing it. Like in India, it's not uncommon to see even prominent so-called big leaders of big so-called movements. When they go to rich people, they just bless them and say, okay, everything you're doing is okay. Just give me some pocket money. And similarly, we also know when Prabhupada first went to America, at the time Prabhupada went to America, there was a boom in so-called Swamis from India going over there and preaching some type of yoga. Those were the days when America was heavily involved in the Vietnam War. And there were many people protesting against the war and so on. So when Prabhupada arrived over there, the so-called bogus Swamis approached him and said, Swamiji, don't tell these Americans to follow these principles and so Ved Dhoti Kurta, no one's going to accept it. Instead, they were advising Prabhupada that even he should start wearing coat or suits and start eating with fork and knife rather than maintain his traditional Vedic dress. So we never deviate from the truth as it comes down in the parampara. Therefore, Prabhupada called the Bhagavad Gita that he translated as it is. So another significant point that we touched upon earlier, which Shukadeva Goswami is emphasizing, is that the Lord protects his surrendered devotees. So all those who are hoping to succeed on the spiritual path must be convinced about this point, that if you take shelter of Krishna, then Krishna is going to protect you. Just like you have the confidence that if you have 100 ruble note and you go to a shop, then from that shop you can buy a commodity in exchange for that 100 ruble note. Similarly, you have the confidence that if you have an airline ticket and the appropriate visas, then you can get on the plane and reach your destination. So you must have confidence that if you surrender to Krishna, Krishna is going to protect you. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Sarva dharma paritaja mam ekam chanam raja ham tvam sarva papi bhayo mokshami masuchaha. The word masuchaha in this verse is very important. Masuchaha means do not worry. So Krishna is explaining in this important verse that summarizes the entire Bhagavad Gita is Give up all varieties of religiousness and just surrender unto me, and in return for your surrendering unto me, I will protect you. Please do not worry. In the material world, we have experience of politicians, dictators, and other leaders telling us, you just give us the vote and we will take care of you. But do they take care of us? They don't. They can't even take care of themselves. How are they going to take care of us? But when Krishna says surrender to me, he really means it. So what does surrender to Krishna mean? Different people have different understanding of what it means surrendering to God. Some people think, just take the name of Jesus Christ, don't eat meat on Fridays, and you may go to the church for 5 minutes on Sunday, and that constitutes surrender to God. Some other people may think, you can do all the nonsense you want, just don't eat meat on few days a week, and just go to the temple sometime once a week, and that constitutes surrender. Surrender to Krishna means that you accept in totality Krishna's instructions. It will be your thought, word, action, execute Krishna's instructions as they're coming down to the parampara. You have to surrender to somebody. Either you surrender to Krishna or you surrender to your contaminated mind. In the absence of spiritual knowledge, in the absence of spiritual guidance, one remains totally surrendered to one's polluted intelligence, polluted mind, and polluted senses. So, spiritual knowledge wakes one up to the reality. Just like in the night, you may dream so many things, but in the morning when you get up, you understand, oh, that was just an illusion, and you reckon with reality. In the night, you can't see things clearly, but when the sun rises in the morning, everything becomes visible again. So in the association of saintly personalities, one begins to understand what the meaning of surrender is, and one begins to recognize the foolishness of just falling blindly the dictates of one's mind and senses. So, spiritual knowledge is essential for helping us understand what is surrender. Two important elements in the principle of surrender are jnana and vairagya. Because surrender has to be based on jnana, knowledge. Therefore, in the Bhagavatam it is said, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janyatyasya Viragyam Jnanam Chayada Hitukam. That by rendering devotional service, one develops causeless knowledge and detachment. So knowledge that you receive from the spiritual master, knowledge that you receive from the sadhus, knowledge that you receive from the scriptures, helps us to understand what is one's constitutional duty. And then as you execute devotional service, there is a development of vairagya. Vairagya means renunciation. Renunciation from that which is unnecessary, not renunciation from those activities which are necessary. So, as one progresses on the path of devotional service, there must be the development of attachment to Krishna and detachment from Maya. Prabhupada gives the example, just like a hungry man, as he puts the morsel of food in his stomach, he feels satisfaction. So similarly, as we execute devotional service, there must be the realization, the development of detachment from sex life and other activities of sense enjoyment. One must realize that Krishna is the maintainer and the protector and the supreme enjoyer. 𝐾𝐢𝐬𝐭𝐫𝐞𝐞 Kṛṣṇa Bhrataya. Chaitanya Charitamrita states that Krishna is the only master and we are all his servants. So we must recognize that Krishna is the only master and our duty is to serve that supreme master. Thakur Bhaktivinoda in a very nice prayer has given us what surrender really means. Thakur Bhaktivinoda says, Manasa deha gaya yo kichur mora arpilam tuya pade nanda kishora. My dear Lord, I place everything at the lotus feet. My mind, my body, my senses, my wife, my children, my house, my property. A devotee who acts with this mentality, that every step, every breath is for the glorification of Krishna, he is a fully surrendered devotee. And Krishna fully protects such a devotee. In the purport, Prabhupada gives the example of Thakur Haridas, who was living in a cave. In the cave where Haridas Thakur was living, there was a snake. And Haridas Thakur, of course, was so absorbed in the holy name that he did not even notice the presence of the snake, nor did he have any fear of the snake. But many people would come to visit Haridas, and they were concerned about the snake getting out of hand. So they used to tell Haridas, please leave the cave and go away. Go to another cave, the snake may bite you at any time. Well, Haridas had no desire to move. But then when he saw that the visitors were constantly insisting, he agreed to move. But before he could move, the snake itself walked out of the cave and prevented Haridas from going to the trouble of relocating to another location. As Prabhupada explains, the Lord is in the heart of the snake also. So there's so many other examples to show how the Lord protects his devotee even at the cost of breaking his own promises. Just like before the commencement of the battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna had promised the two sides, especially the Kauravas, that he would not participate in the war. So the war had gone on for so many days, and the Pandavas were all still alive. So Duryodhana was getting very worried, because he knew that unless the Pandavas were killed, he would not be able to usurp their kingdom. So Duryodhana went to Bhismadev and said, I know that you are being soft on Arjuna and the Pandavas because you have special weakness for them. Now Bhismadev was a Kshatriya, and you were Kshatriya, these type of insulting words are very, very serious. So Bhismadev decided that he will have to do something to show that he was not being sentimentally soft on the Pandavas. So he made 5 sharp arrows that he was going to use against the Pandavas. As I've said before, the battle of Kurukshetra was fought on very gentlemanly terms. It was a gentleman's war. Not like the present day wars where they bomb in the night and bomb, kill everyone, old people, women, children, without discrimination. They would only fight in the day, and in the evening they would eat and not attack each other. So, Bhismadev had hidden these arrows, but Krishna had informed Arjuna where these arrows were hidden. Arjuna quietly stole the arrows in the night. So when Bhismadev saw the next morning that these arrows that he was going to use against the Pandavas were stolen, he could understand that no one except Arjuna could have discovered where these were hidden. And he could also understand that Arjuna could not have discovered it on his own, but his friend Kṛṣṇa must have told him where these arrows are hidden. So, Bhismadev decided that he was going to fight next day very, very valiantly. And he would fight in such a way that either Arjuna would die or Krishna would have to break his promise. Actually, from the core of his heart, Bhismadev was always a devotee of Lord Shri Krishna. Therefore, when he was leaving his body, Krishna personally came there along with the Pandavas, the demigods, the great sages, etc. So, next day, Bhismadev was fighting so strongly that Krishna, who was on the chariot, could see that Arjuna's life was in danger. So, Krishna ran from his chariot. And while Krishna was running to rescue Arjuna's life, even the cloth fell down from his body. He was in so much anxiety, the Lord ran to save Arjuna. And when Bhismadev saw the Lord there to protect Arjuna, the battle for the day ended. And he said, oh, my heart's desire has been fulfilled now. Because Bhismadev, as a devotee of Krishna, wanted to prove to the world that if you take shelter of Krishna, the Lord will protect you, just like he protected Arjuna. Just like we see in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna doesn't directly tell, but he tells Arjuna to declare to the world, what? Kaunte arja pratijanahi na me bhakta pranashati, that my devotee will never perish. He says, Arjuna, you declare to the world. He doesn't declare directly. He says, you declare to the world, you my devotee, that my devotee will never perish. So one important point to understand on this is that when Krishna says that my devotee will not perish, does not mean that the devotee will never have to face difficulties. Sometimes people have the concept that if they surrender to God or if they adopt the process of devotional service and everything they turn will touch into gold and there'll be no calamity, no distress, no bad news ever. But that is an incorrect understanding of surrender to God. Even if a devotee has to experience difficulty, the devotee enthusiastically accepts the difficulty, thinking that if it is the desire of the Lord that I have to go through this trouble, I'll go through it very enthusiastically, laughingly. And Just like Parikshit Maharaj was cursed to die by the Brahmin boy, but Parikshit Maharaj did not get discouraged at all. He just accepted it as an opportunity to free himself from the entanglement of material life. And how did Krishna save the dying Parikshit Maharaj? He sent him Shukadeva Goswami. So Shukadeva Goswami could enlighten him with the transcendental knowledge, and hence Shukadeva Parikshit Maharaj was liberated. So we have to surrender with full faith that Krishna will protect us. And in the purport, Prabhupada also makes the point how a devotee of the Lord lives very simply. Gives the example of the Goswamis of Vrindavan, how they renounced everything for glorification of the Lord. So our philosophy is, for the Lord we want all opulence, but for ourselves we want simple living. And if that is the principle, then we'll succeed on the spiritual path. We see the very wonderful story in Chaitanya Charitamrita that when Sanatana Goswami was running from the prison, on the way he met his brother-in-law Shrikant, who gave him a very expensive blanket. When Sanatana Goswami met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Banaras, he could detect that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is unhappy seeing that opulent blanket on his body. So Sanatana Goswami went to the beach. He saw an old man with a torn blanket. He said, "You please take my new quilt and give me this old blanket in exchange." The old man said, "You must be joking." But Sanatana Goswami insisted, and he changed his new quilt for an old blanket. New blanket for an old blanket. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw this, he was very pleased. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then said a verse which is very important for all Vaishnavas, and in line with the theme of the verses that we are studying. He said, "A good physician, after curing a disease, does not let the symptoms of the disease remain so that the disease may reappear." So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was saying that once you're coming on the spiritual path, you're renouncing everything. Why do you want to keep little attachment so that your spiritual progress will be retarded? So we're all coming to Krishna consciousness. So when you come to Krishna consciousness, you should gradually give up all your so-called desires of sense enjoyment. The faster you give it up, the better it is. Therefore, Rupa Goswami has said, whatever price, my dear friend, you have to pay for becoming Krishna conscious, please pay that price. Don't bargain. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati Kriyata Medi Kutopi Labhate. So we should not bargain with the price. Pay the price and surrender to Krishna. And surrendering to Krishna is beautiful. It gives one real pleasure. And always remember, if you don't surrender to Krishna, you'll have to surrender to Maya. And surrendering to Maya is very painful and bitter. So surrender to Krishna and experience spiritual happiness. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare